What if the most legendary siege of World War II wasn't a siege at all, but a perfectly engineered trap? At 0530 hours on December 21st, 1944, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe stood in a frozen basement in Bastogne, Belgium. Through the walls, he could feel the rumble of German Panzer tanks maneuvering into position. They were preparing for an assault that would decide, in the next 48 hours, whether the surrounded American forces would survive. McAuliffe was in command of every Allied unit within this tightening steel ring. The 101st Airborne Division, elements of the 10th Armored Division, tank destroyer battalions, artillery units, scattered engineers, and weary stragglers from divisions that had already been shattered. In total, about 18,000 men found themselves encircled by 3 German divisions. McAuliffe was only 46, a West Point graduate from Washington, D.C., but he was the division artillery commander, not the man meant to be in charge. The actual division commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was miles away in Washington, attending conferences. Command had fallen to McAuliffe by default. That morning the Germans had severed the last of the 7 highways, locking the town in a complete embrace. His forces were outnumbered 5-1. They were dangerously low on ammunition. Most of his men lacked proper winter clothing, and the temperatures were plummeting to -15 degrees Celsius. The closest Allied reinforcements were 60 agonizing kilometers away, desperately trying to fight their way through the German lines. The German Panzer Divisions, Second Panzer, Panzer Lehr, and the 26th Volksgrenadier were closing that ring, determined to capture the vital Bastogne Road junction and surge west to the Meuse River and Antwerp. This was Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West. Everything hinged on speed, on seizing these crossroads before American reinforcements could possibly arrive. But the Germans were operating on a fatal misunderstanding. What they believed was a trap for the Americans was, in reality, the single worst tactical mistake of their entire offensive. By choosing to surround Bastogne instead of bypassing it, they were about to concentrate their most precious armor into a killing zone, a decision that would ultimately cost them the equivalent of 5 divisions and any hope of reaching their objective. McAuliffe knew this. He wasn't trapped. He was waiting. Just 2 days earlier, on December 19th, he had gathered his regimental commanders and explained exactly why getting surrounded at Bastogne would be the very thing that destroyed the German offensive. The events of the next 8 days would prove him right. They would shatter Germany's last armored reserve in the West and turn an apparent disaster into one of the most decisive American victories of the entire war. To understand the chaos, we must look at what happened just days before. The first American unit annihilated by the German offensive was the 106th Infantry Division on December 17th. McAuliffe was still moving north from France when he received the horrifying reports of their collapse. The 106th, a Green Division, newly arrived and positioned in the quiet Ardennes sector for seasoning, was holding a ridge along the German border. At 0530 on December 16th, the Germans unleashed a 90-minute artillery barrage from 1,600 guns. Then the tanks came. 3 German armies, 24 divisions, over 400,000 men, smashed an 80-kilometer front held by just 4 tired American divisions. The 106th was surrounded, cut off, and completely overrun. Nearly 8,000 Americans surrendered, marking the largest mass surrender of United States forces in the European theater. McAuliffe knew some of those officers. He knew they were good soldiers. From 8th Corps headquarters, they monitored the final desperate radio transmissions, calls for ammunition, for air support, for any kind of help, and then only static. The real problem was that they had been in the wrong place, fighting the wrong battle. They were spread out, defending a line, and were crushed piecemeal by concentrated German armor. The second disaster struck at Clairvaux on December the 17th. The 28th Infantry Division, holding the town, was hit by the Second Panzer Division, 120 tanks, and 16,000 men. The 28th fought heroically, building to building, for 2 days. They lost 700 men. On December 18th, the town fell. The road to Bastogne was now wide open. By December 19th, McAuliffe had watched 2 American divisions get destroyed. Intelligence reports showed the German breakthrough rolling west, seemingly unstoppable. Every tactical principle, every piece of military doctrine screamed that you don't let yourself get surrounded. You maintain freedom of movement. You keep supply lines open. You avoid being fixed in one place where the enemy can mass his forces against you. To be encircled meant to be destroyed. Everyone in the army knew that, and yet, at 0300 hours on December 18th, the 101st Airborne Division loaded onto trucks and drove north, straight toward Bastogne, with orders to hold the crossroads town at all costs. They had no winter gear, not enough ammunition, and no clear intelligence on the enemy's strength. Command had fallen to McAuliffe, a 46-year-old artilleryman with 0 infantry command experience at this level. He arrived in Bastogne at 0900 hours on December 19th and met with Major General Troy Middleton, the 8th Corps commander, whose headquarters was in the process of a hasty evacuation. The meeting was brief, almost frantic. Middleton's staff was burning documents and loading trucks, the sound of artillery fire growing steadily closer. German armor was reported just 10 kilometers away and moving fast. Middleton told McAuliffe the situation was desperate. 3, maybe 4, German divisions were converging on Bastogne. American units were scattered, retreating in disorder, or destroyed. Within hours, Bastogne would be completely surrounded. Middleton had already sent his available forces to buy time. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, under Colonel William Roberts, had arrived the day before and been split into 3 task forces. Team Desabry sent north, Team Cherry east, and Team O'Hara southeast. These were small forces, perhaps 400 men, and a dozen tanks each. But they were all Middleton had. These small teams bought critical time. At Noville, Team Desabry, reinforced by elements of the 501st Parachute Infantry, held off the entire Second Panzer Division for 36 hours. The fighting was brutal, close-range tank battles in fog and snow. American M18 Hellcat tank destroyers knocked out over 30 German tanks. The Germans finally forced a withdrawal, but the delay cost them 2 full days and heavy casualties. By the time they cleared Noville, the 101st was dug in around Bastogne. Team Cherry was surrounded and largely destroyed, but not before inflicting more delays. Team O'Hara fought a stubborn withdrawal from December 19th to the 22nd. These desperate small unit stands bought the hours McAuliffe needed. Middleton needed the 101st to hold long enough for a counterattack. McAuliffe asked how long. Middleton's reply was grim. Maybe 3 days, maybe a week, maybe until you all die. McAuliffe simply said they'd hold. Then Middleton said something McAuliffe would never forget. Don't worry about getting surrounded. If they surround you, you'll have them right where you want them. At the time, McAuliffe thought it was just brave talk. 3 hours later, after studying the maps, he realized Middleton was absolutely right. Getting surrounded wasn't the disaster. It was the opportunity. At 1400 hours on December 19th, McAuliffe gathered his regimental commanders in that cold basement. The room was crowded, lit by a single bare bulb. He spread a map on the table. Bastogne sat at the center of 7 converging roads. Everything in the Ardennes road network ran through this town. You simply could not move large mechanized forces without using Bastogne's roads. He pointed to the map, explaining what was about to happen and why it would work in their favor. "The Germans need these roads more than we do," he stated. Their entire offensive depended on speed. They had perhaps 4 days to reach the Meuse River, 80 kilometers away, through terrible terrain in the dead of winter. They couldn't do it cross-country with armor. They needed the roads. All the roads ran through here. He continued, "The German Panzer divisions are racing west, trying to bypass us, but they can't, because every ton of supplies, every liter of fuel, every ammunition truck for their spearhead divisions has to come through this network, and we are sitting on it. When they surround us," he explained, "they aren't trapping us. They are committing forces to hold us in place, forces that should be racing west. Every tank they put around our perimeter is a tank that's not reaching the Meuse. Every artillery battery they position to attack us is artillery not supporting their advance. And once they commit those forces, they can't easily pull them back, because we are behind their lines. More importantly, when they surround us, they concentrate their forces around a known objective. We know where they'll come from, because we control the town, and they have to come down the roads. We can prepare defensive positions, prearrange our artillery, and position anti-tank weapons exactly where we need them. When they attack, they will be attacking into prepared defenses from predictable directions, with their own supply lines stretched thin." Lieutenant Colonel Ewell asked the critical question, "What happens if the reinforcements don't break through?" McAuliffe's answer was stark. "Then we all die, but the Germans won't reach the Meuse either, because they'll have wasted too much time and combat power trying to take this town. Either way, the offensive fails. The question is whether we survive to see it." By noon, on December 20th, the Germans closed the ring. All 7 highways were cut. Bastogne was completely surrounded. The perimeter was a 26-kilometer defensive line, manned by the 18,000 American troops. The 501st Parachute Infantry held the east, the 506th held the northeast, the 502nd covered the northwest, and the 327th Glider Infantry held the longest, thinnest line around the south. Behind them all, positioned centrally, were 3 battalions of Hunvium howitzers. This artillery could fire in any direction, with pre-registered concentrations on every likely German approach. The first German probe came at 1500 hours. A company of infantry advanced up the road toward the 327th. The Americans let them get to 200 meters, then opened up with machine guns, rifles, and mortars. The attack broke in 8 minutes, leaving 32 German bodies on the road. American casualties, 3 wounded. They had stopped a company with 3 casualties because the Germans had to come straight up the road. McAuliffe, monitoring the radio, began to see what Middleton meant. The second attack at 1730 was heavier, with 6 tanks. American M18 Hellcats destroyed 3 of them in 90 seconds. The others retreated. American casualties, 5 wounded. The Germans had learned nothing and would likely try the same thing again tomorrow. By December 21st, McAuliffe realized the defense wasn't about holding ground. It was about destroying German units faster than they could be replaced. But there was a catastrophic problem: supplies. The 101st had arrived with minimal ammunition. By December 21st, artillery was limited to just 10 rounds per gun per day. Food was worse. The men were on quarter rations, hungry, cold, and exhausted. Most wore whatever clothing they could scavenge from the dead or civilians. Medical supplies were nearly gone. The division's main medical company had been captured, along with most of the surgeons and morphine. Wounded men were dying from treatable injuries. It was in this desperate moment, on December 22nd, that 4 German officers approached under a white flag. They carried a message from General von Luttwitz demanding surrender to avoid total annihilation. The message gave them 2 hours. It was brought to McAuliffe's command post. He read it, looked at his staff, and said one word: nuts. His staff asked what he meant. "I mean nuts," he said. "That's my response. Tell them to go to hell." The written reply went back to the Germans. To the German commander, nuts. The American commander. The German officers were confused. Colonel Harper, escorting them back, explained it simply. It means go to hell. Von Luttwitz was not amused. The refusal meant he would have to take Bastogne by force, committing even more resources, exactly what McAuliffe wanted. On December 23rd, a miracle happened. The weather cleared. For the first time in a week, the sky was blue. McAuliffe looked up and saw what every soldier had been praying for. American C-47 transport planes, dozens of them, dropping supply bundles by parachute. It was a massive operation. 241 aircraft dropped 144 tons of supplies. Ammunition, medical bundles, food, and plasma floated down. The artillery allocation jumped from 10 rounds per gun to 40. Medical stations received plasma and morphine. The resupply changed everything, both tactically and psychologically. The garrison went from the edge of collapse to combat capable in one afternoon. Then came the second wave, P-47 Thunderbolts, flying close support. The German Panzers, painted green and brown for summer, stood out starkly against the white snow. The P-47s dove in streams, dropping bombs, firing rockets, and strafing with machine guns. McAuliffe watched 6 tanks burn in 20 minutes. The Germans, who had owned the battlefield, now found that operating in daylight was suicide. Their morale plummeted. On Christmas morning, at 0300 hours, the Germans launched their main assault. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, fresh from Germany, hit the western perimeter, trying to break through to the center of Bastogne. They achieved initial surprise and penetrated the American line, getting tanks into the village of Hemrol. McAuliffe rushed to his operations center and began coordinating the defense. But the American defense was designed in layers. The penetration exposed the German tanks to fire from multiple directions. Tank destroyers hit them from the flanks. Pre-registered artillery broke up the follow-on infantry. The advance stopped 600 meters inside the perimeter. At 0800, McAuliffe ordered counterattacks. The fighting was room to room. By noon, the Germans were pulling back, leaving 18 destroyed tanks. They had thrown everything they had at one spot, and it had failed. It was their best and last chance. Then, at 1650 hours on December the 26th, Lieutenant Charles Bulge of the 4th Armored Division crashed through the German lines from the south. The siege was over. The road was open. What the Germans didn't realize was that they had already lost. By concentrating on Bastogne for 8 days, they destroyed their own timetable. The spearhead divisions never reached the Meuse. From the German perspective, the battle was a complete failure. General von Luttwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps, had orders to bypass Bastogne if necessary. Speed was everything. But on December 19th, when intelligence confirmed the 101st Airborne was in the town, the plan changed. He couldn't leave an elite force behind his lines, threatening his supplies, so he committed forces to the siege. On December 22nd, he sent the surrender demand, expecting a rational acceptance. The nuts reply infuriated him, because it meant committing major forces to an assault. The true tragedy for the German war effort was the fate of the Second Panzer Division. This was the spearhead, the unit intended to reach the Meuse first. By December 22nd, they had raced 60 kilometers, bypassing strong points, and were within 5 kilometers of the river at Dinan. The commander von Lauer could see his objective. And then, everything stopped. The division's fuel trucks, which were supposed to follow on the roads through Bastogne, never arrived. They were being interdicted by American forces from the trapped town, ambushed by patrols, and hit by artillery. The fuel that should have kept Second Panzer moving was burning in wrecked trucks 50 kilometers behind them. The division's advance dropped to 0. On December 26th, the spearhead of the Second Panzer Division, stranded without fuel near the village of Quelles, was surrounded and completely destroyed by American forces. The division's commander abandoned his tanks and led 600 survivors on foot back through American lines, leaving nearly all of the division's remaining armor behind. The division had ceased to exist as a combat unit. The accounting of German losses around Bastogne was staggering. They lost the equivalent of 5 divisions: Second Panzer, Panzer Lehr, 26th Volksgrenadier, 15th Panzer Grenadier, and elements of the 9th Panzer. These units represented roughly 50,000 men and 350 tanks at the start. By mid-January, perhaps 20,000 effectives remained, with fewer than 100 tanks. The German Army Group B estimated its total casualties around Bastogne at over 20,000 killed, wounded, and missing, plus over 200 tanks destroyed or abandoned. These losses were irreplaceable. The panzer divisions lost at Bastogne were the divisions that could have defended the Rhine River. Instead, they were gone. The Americans paid heavily, too. The 101st and attached units suffered approximately 2,500 casualties. But unlike the Germans, American losses could be replaced. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe became world famous for his one-word reply. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and promoted to Major General, later rising to become a 4-star general and Commander-in-Chief of the United States Army Europe. But the legend of nuts often obscures the real story. The real lesson of Bastogne is that of tactical genius. McAuliffe understood that the side that controls critical terrain and forces the enemy to attack prepared defenses holds an enormous advantage. All the German mobility and armor mattered little when they were forced to attack fixed positions. The Americans didn't let the Germans trap them. They invited the Germans to concentrate their forces around a fortified town, and then they systematically destroyed those forces. The Germans thought they were besieging Bastogne. In reality, Bastogne was besieging them, fixing them in place, bleeding them dry, and ensuring Hitler's last great offensive would fail.